thank you, Mr. Fraser, for being here in the Jaume Bofill Foundation in Barcelona with us. And we are going to start our talk about teachers, teacher training, teaching, and education in general.
Well, I'm honored to be here, and I'm learning so much by being here in Barcelona and Catalonia. There's so many interesting conversations and so many opportunities to both learn and then clarify my own thinking, because we're having these kind of conversations. So thank you for inviting me.
That's great. You have an impressive curriculum. Actually, I just wanted to know how things we are doing here in Europe and things that you are doing in North America are similar or different. Because you have experience in teacher training, you have experience in policy making, you've been dealing with not only the performance of teaching, but also the discourse and the rethinking discourse that we need to develop. What do you think we have in common, or we are doing different in both sides of the world?
As soon as you ask me what we have in common or what we have different, I realize I'm right at the edge of my expertise, because I know so little about either Catalan education or European education. But it seems to me that we are struggling with some very basic common issues. In all the conversations I've had here in Barcelona, the issue of how we improve teacher education because we're not yet satisfied with it is similar to some conversations I've been having in the United States for 30 years. Because we all know we have to improve. We have to do it better. We're not satisfied with it. And one of the common themes that's come up a lot in these conversations is the notion of getting teachers in training, people who are not yet teachers, to spend way more time in schools. So that teacher education is not just theoretical, but it's really school-based, and it's in the context of the school that you're learning and challenging and clarifying your thinking. In neither place do we want to go to a kind of apprentice training where you just work in the school and learn the tricks of the trade. We want a theoretical foundation. But you don't just sit in the university classroom and learn theory and then one day walk out the door and become a teacher. You need to be in the context of a classroom, trying ideas, and then coming back to the university and discussing the theoretical construct. And we call that, in the United States and I guess here, the idea of a residency program where teachers spend a full year in a classroom. And I have become a very strong advocate of any teacher preparation program, whether it's in a 3-year, 4-year, or 5-year, either undergraduate or combined undergraduate, graduate program. At least one of those years should be in the schools from the day the teachers arrive till the day the teachers leave, a full year of experiencing the life of a school, teaching under supervision, getting feedback, and then coming back to the university and thinking about all of that. So that's something we have very much in common. I have a sense that that in both countries, universities are very much rethinking their role in the larger society. I think both European and American universities had gotten to a stage of being very satisfied with themselves, and now people are asking questions about, well, maybe we need a larger dialogue about rethinking the university. So all of that's part of what's going on.
And what are we doing wrong? I mean, we have all the kids at school sitting still, doing nothing, or just doing very theoretical exercises. And it seems we have also to split discourses between practice and theory in the university, at the university too. Is it possible to blend it? Is it possible to bridge both sides of the equation? Because just having more hours of practicum is not going to make it.
It's not going to do it. No,
it's
not only is it possible, it's essential to find ways to bridge this, because what we're, both the universities and the secondary schools and the primary schools and the elementary schools all have functioned in both Europe and North America in a very much of a transmission mode. I am the teacher, I will now teach you, out of my mouth will come all knowledge, you are an empty vessel and I will pour it into you. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work for young children, it doesn't work in university classrooms. There's a certain percentage of the population that learns that way. And I think in an industrial era where it was all right for a small percentage of the population to get a good education and become sort of the intellectual leaders or the managers, and many people to work on the assembly lines or in factories or whatever, it might have functioned. I don't think it ever functioned well. It collapses as soon as we move into a knowledge-based economy and into a focus on a more democratic society where every citizen needs to be engaged at every level. As soon as you move that way, then the transmission mode of education collapses and needs to be replaced with a much more interactive kind of learning. So I have been much influenced by the work of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, who talks about education as a dialogue where it's not that we as educators apologize that we have nothing to teach, but I teach from my expertise and I learn from your expertise, and among us we recreate something. So that's a very different approach to education. And I think it's a more democratic approach, but I also think it's an approach that's going to function much more effectively in the economic world of the 21st century.
So in fact, we are adding here the idea of teamwork or networking, or even adding new agents for educating the new generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose this is a more, well, it's a wider vision of what education is and a different way of rethinking it. You are currently a teacher in the New York University. And I'm sure you also had all the experiences from the modern schools. John Dewey and company that they did there, and Ferrer Guardia started here. How much do you think from your discourse now comes from that part of background, which was also something that was, it's not the first time we claim for that, but it never really performs properly, it never really develops and go ground. So how much it comes from previous claims that will never have future, and how much is really opening doors to new ways of doing things in a much more connected and hyper-connected world and in this transmedia universe that we are getting into?
I think you raised some really interesting connections here. You know, John Dewey, who was writing 100 years ago, we're all rediscovering Dewey at this moment. And it's partly because this transmission mode of education is collapsing around us. It's simply not working. We have this huge dropout rate. We have students who are saying, I'm just bored to death in school. I'm not learning anything. And we have an economy that demands people who are very thoughtful, who are able to be creative. We have a crisis in democracy that needs citizens to be more engaged. And suddenly people are saying, maybe the transmission mode that Dewey criticized 100 years ago is in fact to be criticized. And so maybe we should go back, and people are restudying Dewey. You know, I also see Dewey taught in schools of education by a total transmission mode. You know, you will now learn what John Dewey said about what's wrong with the transmission mode. And so that doesn't work. But that's one of the reasons I like the residency model, where people, I see this with aspiring teachers who have been in a school all day or all week trying to struggle with how do you make a class work. They come back to the university and they read Dewey in a completely different way because of what they've been struggling with. And I've also do a lot of work with teachers. I'm personally a historian, so I work a lot with history teachers. And one of the things we've been struggling with is, how do you make history come alive for students? So I see, one of my colleagues has done some research where he's interviewing high school students who say history is my most boring subject. And that makes me so sad because, I love history, you love history, and there's this notion that if we can make it come alive, it's a discipline that creates democratic citizens. But that means we have to reinvent. If history is, I will tell you lots of information and you will memorize names and dates, it becomes a very boring subject. If we turn history into some of the work I've been doing with a project-based approach, where students have to think about ways to teach each other history. So, I work, again, a lot with secondary teachers in developing project-based approaches. And we start from, earliest history moving right through. So the unit that I've done a lot of work on with some teachers in New York focused on the Great Depression in the United States between 1929 and 1939. And in that unit, we divided the class. So one group of students were unemployed citizens. One group were factory workers who were angry. One group were artists who were struggling because of the economic downturn. One group were advisors to President Franklin Roosevelt, who's trying to address the Great Depression. And one group were rich people who were angry at the idea of any reform. And each group of students then had to study the Great Depression so they could teach the rest of the class from that perspective. And so one group, the group representing President Roosevelt and his advisors, presented a cabinet meeting, and they pretended they were discussing various solutions to the Great Depression. The union people presented a sit-down strike in Flint, Michigan, where the industrial workers sat down on the job and refused to move until they got better working conditions. And the class was learning, and it wasn't like, my tendency as a teacher is, I got to give you a lot of background information first. This was the way they learned it, not because I gave them some background information. And the students had to ask each other. So if the group representing the Roosevelt cabinet, the rest of the class would ask them questions because they had to understand. That was how they were going to learn. The reality was, in preparing their presentation, the students did way more reading, way more looking at documents than any class I've ever taught before. So it's a way of making history come alive. Yes, it's fun, but they also learn much more.
And well, I've heard a lot of, I don't know, a lot of learning by doing, role play, action reflection in what you've just said. Yes. And it rings a bell. I was just thinking of the relay alternative program for teacher training. And how much do you think those new alternative systems, which are not so connected to the university theoretical framework, going to be effective on the ground? I mean, how much information do we have about the impact, the results, the good evaluation of the result of those approaches, which are so active and so modern in a way and so ancient in another, yes, yeah. Which is connected to real way of learning thousands of years before. So how much do we know about the results, the assessment, and the performance of those teachers outside?
That's a very intriguing question. So let me answer it at two levels. In terms of the results, we don't have any results that I trust at this point. When I was doing some work a few years ago, I was writing about teacher education, and I wanted to look at some studies that compared Teach for America with traditional ed school teacher preparation programs. What are the results? And I found 3 studies that compared Teach for America graduates with the graduates of traditional ed schools. One study said the Teach for America graduates were much more successful. One study said they were much less successful. And one study said they're about the same. So what I know is 2 of those studies are wrong and 1 is right, but I don't know which one is which.
It sounds very university oriented.
Yes. What I do know is that the emergence of alternative programs, whether it's Relay or Teach for America or the Boston Teacher Residency Program or city-based internships that are springing up all over the country, has forced universities to rethink the way they do their work. And at that level, I do think the competition has been very healthy. And I think that some of these new programs are focusing very directly on what's the practice and are helping universities break out of an overly theoretical model of teacher education. I worry, I think Relay does an excellent job of, Relay is a school of education that really focuses on try these methods and they will work in a classroom tomorrow. It's very practice focused. I think I'm based in the university, we in universities need to learn some of that, but I also think people in Relay need to learn about, if teachers are professionals, they need a theoretical grounding for their work that Relay doesn't offer them. So in the long run, I think Relay can learn from universities and universities can learn from Relay. In the short run, I think we're all better off because of the competition. And if you get them in a quiet room, away from any cameras, people from Relay will admit that they do what they do really well, but there may be more to creating a professional. I wish more people in the universities would admit that we have things to learn also from the competition. So I think we're in a moment where a lot of this is breaking open. What's interesting to me is that as recently as 1990, if you wanted to be a teacher in the United States, you went to a university-based program. Today, 40% of new teachers this school year are from alternative providers. The university has lost its monopoly in teacher preparation. I think that's healthy. And I think all of us together, if we can work together instead of as enemies, can create something that's better than we've had.
And what do we have to add to those two big providers? Or what else do we have to add here now that we are entering in the digital age? I mean, now all the universities seems to pin their improvement in technology, M-learning, MOOCs, e-learning, or whatever programs that really opens to Internet of Things or to the new networking system. What else do we have to add to practicum and theory to really be focusing in what we are going to need for the new generations to perform, to learn, and to go on being good citizens and adapted to what else they are going to need?
I don't know. I think about it a lot because I don't know, and because I'm of a former generation that, my students say to me, why are you teaching us all this technology? We're a generation that grew up with technology. You're the generation that had to, as they say, we're technology natives. You're technology immigrants. You had to come to the world of technology, and I think they're right about that. What I also know is that it's one thing to know technology. It's quite another thing to know how to use technology in the service of other people's learning. So, all my students can type on their iPhones much faster than I can, and they know how to use technology in ways that are unimaginable to me. But they may or may not know how to use that technology to help students learn what they need to learn. And at that level, I think all of us need to be finding much more creative ways to approach it. I think technology used badly can create real passivity. I mean, if we talk about the transmission mode of education, if you move to MOOCs or something, I can now lecture, instead of lecturing to 30 students in a seminar, I can lecture to thousands of students online. But it's a lecture mode, a transmission mode that creates kind of passivity. On the other hand, that's not the only way to use technology. And I know there are technology critics who say it's always going to create a passive world. I see interactive seminars across continents. I've taught once where I had students in England and in New York studying at the same time and talking to each other about different school contexts. We're trying to set up something now in my university where I have students New York University students taking classes on campus in New York and in study abroad sites in London and Accra in Ghana. And the fact that we can have a seminar where we're all learning from each other, that's extraordinary. That never could happen without technology. Another university, the University of Southern California, has set up a system where they have cameras in the classroom of student teachers that are photographing, filming their work. And then the aspiring student teacher and the university mentor, although they may be 1,000 miles apart, sit down and analyze that film together and talk about what happened. That's much more sophisticated than when I used to sit in the back of a classroom and take a few notes about the student teacher. So I think technology can be passive or active just like any other form. And we're just on the edge of inventing what that's going to look like. But it opens up possibilities, especially for widely dispersed audiences.
That social collaborative knowledge building would be great if it could really add also different visions, maybe from enterprises, social communities, citizens associations, policymakers. How do you think universities could really open to other visions, other proposals, and even other ways of understanding teaching, teacher training, and education in general?
Oh, it's easy. All universities have to do is fundamentally rethink the nature of knowledge.
Easy.
Easy. I do think it's true in a sense. If we believe in a model of knowledge where, because I have a PhD, I have a lot of knowledge, and my major role now is to transmit that knowledge either because I write articles or because I speak, then the university doesn't have much to learn from other people. If, on the other hand, university faculty have certain kinds of knowledge, but may not have other kinds of knowledge, practicing teachers have knowledge that university faculty of education don't have, and parents have other kinds of knowledge, and industrial leaders who hire teachers, who hire graduates of schools, not teachers, but hire graduates, have other kinds of knowledge, and community-based people who are worried about the life of their community have other knowledge, then together, all of us are going to be smarter than any of us alone. And it's not that the university suddenly apologizes for them. I bring certain things. I probably know more information about American history than many of the people in that dialogue may. But some of the residents of the neighborhoods where I live know more about how that history is actually played out in that neighborhood. And some of the teachers who are trying to teach history to sometimes bored adolescents know more about what it takes to get it engaging. All of us together having that kind of a dialogue, whether it's about history or technology or mathematics, are going to be smarter and move the conversation forward. But it takes a certain level of humility, particularly on the part of university administrators and faculty, which I have seen not often enough.
You are really presenting a very connectivist panorama. Do you think this is really a vision that is very elitist? Is it only going to function with the MIT students because they have more resources than anybody in the world? Or could that be really transferred to other places, other countries, other situations?
It's going to happen last with the MIT students that we're talking about and the MIT faculty, because they're comfortable where they are. And change always happens where people are a little already uncomfortable and at least therefore open to kind of change. So I in terms of changing teacher education or breaking a kind of transmission mode, I don't find the elite research universities particularly receptive. In fact, I find them the least receptive. What I find is working with community colleges, working with small regional universities. I tell a story. When I was at the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, I worked with universities all over the country to help them rethink the way they did teacher preparation. And I found, with wonderful exceptions, that research universities were sort of, we're fine, why are you bothering us, Jim? But other kinds of universities were much more willing to change. So I worked with a small regional private religious college in Indianapolis, And the academic leader of the university said to me, "I'm not happy with our teacher education program. Will you help me rethink it?" And so they had a very traditional transmission mode of teacher education. They said, "We're going to just stop that, and we're going to create a teacher education program in which it's school-based. The students spend a whole year in a residency model and come back to the university for education, but for seminars and theory. But also the education faculty needs to go and do seminars in the schools, and not just for the students from the university, but for the faculty of the school, so that everybody becomes a learning community. And by the way, the arts and science faculty has to also be part of this enterprise. And so every student in this revised program had an arts and science faculty advisor to help them with content. They didn't necessarily take courses, but if I was in that university and I was aspiring to be a biology teacher, I had the email and telephone of the chair of the biology department, who part of her course load now was to help these students. And if a student is designing a new lesson in biology and they're not sure of the content, they could call her and she would work with them to revise that lesson. That changed the job description of the arts and science faculty and the university faculty and the teachers in the schools and the students, and created a learning network, and it forced people to talk to each other that had never talked to each other before. That was a wonderful model. I think that, it's the University of Indianapolis in Indianapolis, Indiana. They are my model of real reform in teacher preparation. That would never happen in a research university. So it is not limited to the elite. It's going to be I think, much more from the ground up. But most reform of higher education, the elite universities come late to the game.
Well, it seems you are talking about a huge reform, actually, changing not only the teacher trainers that are going to change the teacher performance, that are going to change the students change. It seems we plan to change the educational system for the kids, for the students, but without the students. What's their voice here? What's the role of student families, parents, and user associations going to be in this reform?
If they are not at the table in some of these conversations, the reform is going to fail. And it's going to fail for two reasons. One, the families are going to be way too distrustful of it, and they're going to want to remove their children from it if they aren't invited into the conversation. And two, it's going to fail because it won't have their wisdom. So, when I teach the Introduction to Education course at New York University, we actually meet in schools, and there are times when we have student panels. I invite a group of students to talk to my aspiring teachers and say, the question I always pose to the students is, what do you wish your teachers had known? And they have such thoughtful things to say. So I remember one student, one of my very nervous young aspiring teachers said to these students, what do you do when a classroom gets out of control? Because everybody worries about managing a classroom. And this kid said, well, the classroom didn't start out of control. How come you let it get out of control? What did you do? What should you think about next time earlier in the process? I could have said that 15 times, it never would have sunk in. The fact that a sophomore in high school said it made it come alive. My colleague Ken Zeichner talks a lot about having parents particularly join faculty meetings to talk about reform in teaching. And he said, it's always really difficult. Parents are busy, and university people are not sure that they really want to learn from them. But if you can get past that, you get a much more in-depth reform process going. So I think it's essential. I think about one of the major reforms in the United States right now is the Common Core State Standards. We're trying to create something closer to a national curriculum, which the United States has never had. And one of the political problems is that the math in the new curriculum, which is much more sophisticated math, it's less memorizing and it's more asking why is this important? Why does this work? Parents can't help their kids with their homework. So parents start to get really nervous about it. And we need to bring parents into the conversation before we implement that kind of a change, not after the fact, because otherwise we build up this huge opposition to something that I think is actually an excellent reform.
We are thinking of what are we going to do to improve the system, but how can we know that we are actually doing it? How can we identify the moment where learning is happening, where teaching and learning is really in synchrony, or where a teacher trainer is really doing what they have to do to help teachers to go to the class and have their own performance there?
I have an easy answer that doesn't work. I mean, the answer is, of course, that we need to shift from a focus on inputs to a focus on outputs. It doesn't work to ask how many hours of student teaching, how many credits of coursework have we poured into a teacher. What we need to do is look at how well are our graduates teaching. The reason that's complicated is that we don't yet have very good measures of outputs. So I have become a very strong advocate of moving from measuring teacher preparation programs, whether they're university-based or Relay or Teach for America, and evaluating all of them by the outputs. How well do their graduates teach? The problem is we don't have very sophisticated measures yet. Yes, I get in trouble with a lot of my friends over this. I want to know the test scores of the students, of the graduates of these different programs. I think that's one measure, but it's a very insufficient measure. These tests aren't very good yet. We've got a long way to go to make them good. And the test scores may or may not tell the value added from one particular teacher. So I want to know the test scores. I also want to know what the student evaluations are. Students are very perceptive about their teachers. I think particularly the English system of having trained observers in a classroom looking at what the teacher's doing, not within the old sort of check, did the teacher do this, do this, do this, but watching what's going on in that class and watching the students and the teacher. If you put all of those things together, we might begin to get some meaningful output measures. But if I had $1 million to invest in education reform, I would put about $900,000 of it into developing better output measures so that we can begin to know the answer to the question you're asking, because we don't.
What's the risk for the university if we really do nothing?
Well, I think, again, I think there's a two-part risk. I think the risk for the university and for society in doing nothing is that we are going to continue to have the kind of dropout rate we have, the numbers of students, the dropout rate, the number of kids who don't complete secondary education is, we're very proud now in the United States. It's down from 25% to 20%. That's better, but it's not nearly good enough. And in Catalonia, it's higher than that. What's happening when students are saying, school is so boring or so irrelevant to my life that I'm going to just drop out? And what kind of skills do they bring to the job market, but also what kind of learning to democratic citizenship do those students bring to the society of the 21st century? But I'm also worried about the future of universities. I think that universities, if they don't rethink not just their approach to teacher education, but their mission in society, are going to find themselves increasingly irrelevant. That people are saying, the university research is really not the kind of research that's going to help society change, so universities are finding their budgets cut. Alternative providers are popular in teacher education. We could have alternative providers in lots of other areas, and universities could get marginalized in very significant ways. So that's a whole set of risks about what if we do nothing. The larger set of risks, I think, do have to do with what kind of society do we want in the 21st century? Are we going to have a kind of learning society in which people are learning together and developing a kind of mutuality and more egalitarian approach? Or are we going to have a society in which there are winners and losers? And, as we know, in the economies of both of our countries, there's a decline in the middle class. There's more poor people, there's more rich people. That's not sustainable, and it's not a world I want to live in. And so I think we have a crisis that we need to address at multiple levels.
Thank you. That's really open-minded. It's been a pleasure to be with you here. I think I've learned a lot, and I have a lot of homework thinking about all this.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to be here, to be at the foundation, to be here in Catalonia, and to learn so much about a different context that makes me think much more carefully about my own context. So thank you so much for having me.